Now Mr. Sri P. Chidambaram to speak.
Mr. Deputy Chairman, sir. This House and the other House passed the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. This was a reform recommended by the Financial Sector Reforms Commission, and we were happy that the government brought this code, and this code was passed by both houses. Subsequently, the government noted that there were some deficiencies in the bill, and they have promulgated an ordinance. I welcome the ordinance, and my party broadly supports this bill, which will replace the ordinance. I'll be very brief because the purpose of my intervention is to point out that the ordinance and the bill that replaces the ordinance throws up some more anomalies, and I'm pretty sure that sooner than later the government would have to come back to the House to remove those anomalies. Thousands of pages have been written on this ordinance. I don't share all those views, but I think it's important that the Honorable Finance Minister takes note of the few suggestions that I wish to make now and reflect on them, whether somewhere in the course of drafting, the amending bill has not become over-inclusive and may in fact become counterproductive to the objective going through the insolvency resolution process. Let me point out just a few aspects of the ordinance and the bill that is replacing the ordinance. Firstly, under Section 29 capital A, the ordinance and the bill keep out a large number of people from becoming resolution applicants. I think that's correct. Any person cannot become a resolution applicant, and some people would have to be excluded from the resolution process. But while doing so, the following people have been excluded. Firstly, a person convicted for any offense punishable with imprisonment for 2 years or more. Now, this could be a completely non-financial crime. This could be some other crime, nothing to do with financial matters, and you are keeping him out. It can be argued that anyone who's been convicted should be kept out. But I think the purpose of this bill is not to enforce a general rule of morality. The purpose of this bill is to ensure that resolution takes place of a company that has become insolvent. I think this is over-inclusive. This should have been confined to crimes arising out of certain specific acts, particularly acts which pertain to finance and economy. Secondly, under Clause F, you're keeping out persons prohibited by the SEBI from trading in securities or accessing the securities market. Now, we know that SEBI prohibits people for 6 months. SEBI will prohibit access for 1 year. Literally read, this section means if you're prohibited, you're kept out. You're not kept out only for the period of prohibition. You're kept out because you're prohibited. I think this again is over-inclusive. Clause H says a person will be excluded if he has executed an enforceable guarantee in favor of the creditor or the corporate debtor who is subject to insolvency. Now, at first blush, it may seem not only the corporate debtor should be kept out, but a person who has executed an enforceable guarantee should be kept out. But there may be any number of cases where the guarantor may resile for good reasons. The guarantor may revoke the guarantee. The guarantor may say, you have not complied with certain conditions, my guarantee is not enforceable. Merely because he's executed an enforceable guarantee. He is not the insolvent. He is not the corporate debtor. Merely because he's extended an enforceable guarantee, if you keep out, I'm afraid you're inviting litigation, even while you're keeping out a large number of potential investors. The most over-inclusive provision is Clause J, and I'm sure the Honorable Finance Minister's attention has been drawn by a number of professionals that this is over the top. Who have you kept out? You have kept out any connected person who is connected to the applicant under Clause A to H. So far, so good. But who is a connected person? A connected person under explanation 1 is a person who is the promoter or in the management or control of the resolution applicant. That is correct. But then clause 2 says, any person who shall be the promoter or in management or control of the business of the corporate debtor during the implementation of the resolution plan. Now, how is this possible? When I want to be a resolution applicant, I cannot be a resolution applicant if I have a connected person. But if I have become an applicant, my application has been accepted, a resolution plan is being implemented, and somebody who's connected becomes a promoter, how will you interrupt the resolution process? I think while 1 is correct, 2 I think is badly drafted, or people have not reflected on the implications of 2. The most damaging explanation is explanation 3. Prima facie, it appears correct. Connected person means the holding company, subsidiary company, associate company, or related party of a person referred to in clause 1 and 2. There is no difficulty with a holding company, subsidiary company, or an associate company. But when you go to related party, this immediately attracts Section 5, Clause 24 of the Act. And under Section 5, Clause 24 of the Act, there's a long list of related parties. I'm sure the Honorable Finance Minister is aware of that very long list. As a result, maybe I'm making an exaggerated statement, practically everyone will be excluded. The resolution applicant is excluded. If he is connected to a person listed in the amendment, because of the connection he is excluded, and the connected party has a relative, and because of the long list of relative parties, he is excluded. Practically every resolution applicant will be excluded. I think one should have been a little more rigorous in the exclusion clauses. One should have kept exclusion to a very, very small number, which definitely must be excluded. But I'm afraid by making the clauses so broad, so over-inclusive, practically everyone in the financial world is likely to be excluded. And then the word relative party takes us back to the definition of relative in the Companies Act. So in a rather circuitous way, a resolution applicant, a connected person, his relative, and the relative defined. Brings in practically everyone, because everyone will in some way or other be brought under the net. Now, what are the consequences of this over-exclusion? There are two consequences. Firstly, the consequence is very few people in India will be eligible to bid. And this worry has been raised by a number of people. It's quite possible that asset reconstruction companies and alternate investment bodies registered abroad will turn out to be the bidders. Most Indian companies which go through a resolution process will pass from the hands of an Indian management to a foreign management. I have no objection to foreigners coming into India and investing, but I think a level playing field should have been created for an adequate number of Indian companies, adequate number of Indian investors to bid for these assets, rather than excluding them by this very over-inclusive ordinance, which will keep out, in my view, a large number of potential Indian investors. The danger is most of these companies will go to the control of foreigners or foreign companies or multinationals. The second danger is you might end up with no bidder for the company as a going concern, and you will end up selling the company in bits and pieces. That is the worst result of this insolvency code. A company has become insolvent. The bank will take a haircut. A new investor will come and put in money. But for the sake of the economy, for the sake of employment, for the sake of producing goods and services, the company must keep going. But if you find no bidder for a company as a going company, somebody will run the company, you're going to sell the assets in bits and pieces. Somebody will sell the machinery, one will sell the building, one will sell the adjoining land, and the company is dead. I think
real estate people.
That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is the current management has driven the company into insolvency, but a new management must step in and continue to revive the company, run the company, so that India's companies will run and India's employment will be protected. I'm afraid these are the two dangers I see by this very, very overbroad exclusion clauses that you have brought. And I would therefore, while we will pass the bill today, I think the Honorable Finance Minister should reflect on it. And the best way to reflect is not to go simply by the advice of his officers, but to invite people from the professional business world and reflect on it and try to see whether this overbroad exclusion can be restricted. I have one last submission. Initially, the RBI sent 12 companies to insolvency. Then they made a list of about 50 companies and said by December 31, if these companies do not come out of insolvency or their NPA issues not resolved, they are to be sent to insolvency. I don't know if it is wise to send so many companies into insolvency in one go. What kind of a message does it give? If a company has become insolvent or is on the verge of insolvency, yes, it must be sent to the resolution process. But I think so many companies to the insolvency process, I'm told by my friends who practice before the insolvency board, that the board is already overloaded. I would like the Honorable Finance Minister to tell us how many applications, how many cases have been referred to insolvency, both by the RBI, by the banks themselves, and by individual creditors. Does a number run to a few dozen, or does it already run to over 100? Where are the insolvency resolution professionals to handle all these companies? Does India have qualified, competent, experienced insolvency resolution professionals running to the hundreds to handle all this? And the last question is, I understand one company has gone through the resolution process. I would like the Honorable Finance Minister to tell us what is the haircut that the bank took in that company. Newspapers are full of stories of bankers not willing to be named, but telling privately journalists that the haircut has to be 60% or 65% or 70%. Well, if the haircut has to be 60% or 65%, so be it. But please understand that these are virtually subsidies that you're giving to the corporate defaulter when you're taking away subsidies for people who want sugar, people who want rice, people who want kerosene. So I don't know if any banker is willing to take such a haircut. But if the first case has ended in a haircut of 65% or 70%, as is hinted in newspapers, 75% as is hinted in newspapers, I think it's wise to go slowly. Not, what does a haircut mean? A haircut means the bank has to take a hit and has to provide the equivalent capital. If I take a haircut of, if a banker takes a haircut of 5,000 crore, then he has to pump in an additional 5,000 crore of capital. As it is, the banks are struggling to keep their capital adequacy ratio. The Honorable Finance Minister is struggling to provide the capital. And if you take large haircuts, you will have to provide either somebody has to bring that capital or the bank for the company, and the bank has to find capital to run its business. I think while the bill that we passed was a good bill, while I concede that there were some anomalies, some applicants should have been excluded, and the ordinance is in the right direction, I think the overbroad way in which the ordinance has been drafted, the over-inclusive manner in which the sections have been drafted, I'm afraid throw up new challenges, which I believe the Honorable Finance Minister would have to address. If not today, he would have to address it in due course of time. With these observations, we support the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chidambaram. Thank you very much.